I'm going to start off this Omni-Movement Mastery video by showing you something you've definitely never seen before, just to validate that this is worth your time. In the new Black Ops 6, and this applies to both the beta, Warzone, and the future release of the game, you could do something insane. You could slide into prone. Yep, a brand new, entirely new meta, which I'm going to talk about in this video and explain how this is going to be insanely OP and basically replaces drop shotting. But I just wanted to get that out there. This meta video for how you can master pretty much everything related to Omni-Movement isn't just about showing you the new things that you can do, isn't just about showing you all of the Omni-Movement capabilities, it's about explaining how you can actually utilize this to produce better gameplay, win more fights, and not feel out of your depth. Omni-Movement for sure sounds intimidating, but in reality is actually super accessible, easy to use, and I think lots of players are going to get to grips with it very well. Now, before we begin this video, there is a setting that absolutely everybody has to change. This applies to keyboard and mouse and controller. This is a platform agnostic video, so to speak. You don't need to worry about what input device you're using, but you absolutely have to change this. You need to go into the movement settings for your device, be that controller or keyboard and mouse, the settings are the same, and change tactical sprint assist to on and set the delay to 0 whilst enabling sprint assist sideways and sprint assist backwards. And what this means is that you're always going to be sprinting and tactical sprinting in any given direction regardless of how you're moving, and this means that you can produce more of these slides and more of these dives with less dead movements and requiring less buttons to do so. This creates the most fluid version of the gameplay, and it's absolutely something you should do. As a little side note for those of you on controller, if it feels as though you're not entering the sprint animation whilst moving forward, that is actually because you have a dead zone issue or a dying analog stick and you probably have some dust or dirt in there. So hit that with some compressed air and you should notice a forward sprint that looks like what I'm doing right here. Now, we need to talk about all the new features in Omni-Movement, and then we're going to talk about how you can utilize them in your gameplay to produce maximum gunplay. Now, we are currently in the training arena on the beta, which is really helpful, and if you want to practice your Omni-Movement in a carefree environment without worrying about opponents shooting you, I would highly recommend this. But I just want to explain to you guys all of the new features of Omni-Movement and all of the new things that you can do. So to start with, you can sprint left and right now, irrespective of just being able to go in, forward motions and slightly strafing backwards. You can now pretty much sprint in all given directions. It's a unilateral motion, and it just works in any given way. You can now also slide sideways, regardless of which side, as long as you're in this sort of semi-sprinting animation, which you always should be considering the new settings I've given you. And you can slide backwards as well, which is actually surprisingly more useful than it sounds. Like, you'd be surprised how much this actually comes in handy. These are all really useful movement features that lets you do more things than you ever could before. You can also dive in all of those given directions. You can dive backwards, you can dive sideways, and diving, generally speaking, in this game is pretty much, again, omni-movement, omnidirectional, but it is something that is going to get you killed more. I would highly recommend only using diving if you're trying to get out of a gunfight situation and want to re-engage an opponent. I would not recommend using diving as a means of attacking an opponent, because I just find that it puts you in this fixed position that makes you easier to kill. But diving is entirely a useful option in this game, and it's something that you can utilize, and diving off of platforms in particular and changing height by using diving is a very effective tool, like you could see on this staircase. It allows you to re-engage a target from a completely different angle, whilst partially keeping your own body in cover as well, which is pretty insane. So diving in all directions is an option, sliding in all directions is an option, sliding backwards is an option, and sliding forwards. You also have a brand new aiming mantling system, which means that whenever you approach the corner of an object, your gun is going to slightly angle itself around that corner to produce a more peak-like system. Now, this is worth remembering because this means that more of your body is going to stay in cover whilst peeking any given corner, which is actually very beneficial. Now, naturally, players are moving a little bit quicker in this game, so you need to be snappier with your aim, but if you could utilize this corner peeking system, you can keep yourself in more cover, exposing your targets to more flak and keeping yourself safer for longer. Let's talk about meta. It's time to talk about the things that matter and the things that people are interested in, which is, okay, well, I understand how Omni-Movement works now, and I know what it can do. How can I use it to produce better gameplay, win more fights, and do well? Well, there's a couple of options. Now, the first thing I showed you at the start of this video is the slide to prone, and I truly feel this is going to be something, especially in Warzone, that pretty much replaces drop shotting. Now, drop shotting an opponent means you engage in gunfire and then you hit the deck, and it's not the smoothest animation in the world. But sliding into prone means that you can be a motionable target that's moving and then quickly change the direction that you're moving in. It's a fully insane situation. Like, it looks ridiculous. If you see somebody do this in third person, it's so hard to hit them because their momentum completely changes. It looks like they're coming towards you, so you start adjusting your aim for them moving towards you, and then suddenly they stop. And this can be super, super powerful in the right hands. You can see me doing it here, how well it just gets you into those headshot scenarios, gets you into those scenarios that people won't expect. But what's crazier is that you can actually combine this even more to create an even more fluid movement system. And I like to consider this kind of like a counter step or a jab step. For those of you who are familiar with NFL or American football, more like a cut step as a running back. And it means that you could slide and then instantly move momentum into a different location. So you can slide to prone and then just keep moving. You don't even need to stop. Like, you can go to slide to prone and then sprint completely out in the other direction. So you can see me slide to prone here and then counter strafe back across myself, creating this really hard movement to follow for the opponent, but something that works really effectively for me in terms of creating windows to win a gunfight. You can literally chain these together to become some sort of like sliding on the floor king, and it's absolutely doable. It's genuinely terrifying how much momentum you can maintain whilst being on the floor, which is not something we're used to in any Call of Duty title. I really feel as though this is going to be an eventual replacement for something like dropshotting, and I think it's something you should get used to. This is something I see personally becoming a huge part of the meta for Omnimovement in terms of how you fight opponents. And if you nail the ranges correctly, it means that your opponent's going to be shooting you in the feet whilst you're shooting them in central mass and the head, which means that you're creating a huge time to kill difference that's going to be so large that people aren't going to be able to keep up with you, and you're going to win more of your gunfights. It's also a very generally jarring motion to keep up with. Now, the next meta movement, so to speak, is actually something pretty simplistic. Now, normally in COD, we do this sort of general thing where we engage a corner and then we back away and then we re-challenge it. You know, the chow and re-chow is a really common feature in COD. And what's crazy is that now that we have this sideways slide, chowing and re-chowing has actually been easier than ever before. You were capable of chowing round a corner while sliding out of it and then going away really quickly to get a reload off and then re-challenging straight away. It's really worth getting used to this new mechanic of being able to slide sideways, because I genuinely believe it's going to change the challenge and re-challenge meta in Warzone and in multiplayer too. And if you find yourself in a head glitch scenario or in a doorway scenario like I'm in here, you're able to just alternate in and out of this cover really effectively. You're able to slide in and out back on yourselves, and then if worst case scenario you take too many hits, you just dive out the way to give yourself more time to produce some more plating and just get out of the situation. So this is going to be a huge thing, I think, generally for how you approach a gunfight and how you move in and out of a gunfight. The chow and re-chow using the slide sideways is going to be huge, and diving out of the way once you've decided you've reached a point where you've taken too much damage is going to fall into part of that equation. Highly recommend getting to grips with that. Now, the next bit of movement that I think you should get used to whilst checking out all of Omnimovement is the forward dive, because the forward dive can actually be inadvertently quite helpful for attacking an opponent. Forward diving in this game is actually somewhat mildly effective at breaking through a piece of cover or around a corner, and you can ADS and shoot straight away, so it's actually surprisingly useful. Now, this is the most risky compared to the sideways slide and also the slide to prone that I've shown you before, because you are exposing your head forward first, meaning that if somebody decides to burst fire you, you're getting shot exclusively in the fastest place to die. So that's something to be aware of. And it's just a generally useful tool for attacking a corner or attacking a player, is just diving straight towards them. It's going to break a few cameras. It's going to give them a few things that's going to be confusing for them. And in Black Ops 6, close range aim assist has been nerfed. So we know for a fact that diving towards an opponent from close range is going to be really hard for them to deal with. Now, I've managed to kill myself in the training range, which is quite impressive, but there is a reason for that. The final thing I want to talk about, and arguably the biggest thing related to Omnimovement, is the fact that you are going to have to relearn how movement works in this game. Now, generally speaking, movement in COD only matters insofar as the cover around you, and I'm going to use this little missile battery as an example. In traditional CODs, we would duck down, re-peek, duck down, re-peek, and that's normal. Modern Warfare 3, perfect example of that. Duck down, re-peek. Occasionally we'd hear a little bit of snaking as well in some places, although that seems to be moderately nerfed in this game. And that is how things have conventionally worked. But with cover now and Omnimovement, you can do things you've never done before, like peek somebody from two entirely different angles simultaneously. I peek him from here, I slide to my left, I peek him from here. This is a revolutionary way of approaching gunfights, and it's going to be hugely important, especially in Warzone, when you realize that you can use Omni movement to mantle and use cover in such a way that it's just inherently unbeatable. You know, it's no more of this bobbing up and down. It's I'm going to literally slide one side and peek you, and then slide the next side and counter peek you from a different location to give myself more of a window to win a gunfight. That is a hugely important part of Omni movement, and if it, honestly, even though the sprinting, the diving, and everything is there, generally the biggest point is how much this movement system interacts with the cover systems around you. Even just peeking this doorway, I'm gonna slide to my right, peek an angle, slide to my left, counter peek an angle. That is massive. It's going to change how most gunfights take place. And if you have something like a central column, like this, you know, little set of bookshelves and this little set of walls here, you can quite literally peek this flag over here, back around this way, challenge away from it, reach around it again. It's genuinely insane. Like the amount of ways that you can use a single piece of cover in combinations with these sliding systems is going to be huge for the game. The other thing I want to touch on, and something that I think is worth talking about, is that a lot of people are going to just be sprinting forward a lot. And that's great. It's going to take a while for you to understand and learn that sideways sprinting and backwards sprinting is now an option. So you're effectively unlearning a lot of the conventional gameplay of just running forwards and, you know, generally moving and challenging forwards that you would in previous CODs. And you're having to learn, well, actually, I can use a full 360 degree of motion. And what this means is you need to be better with your spatial surroundings. For example, if I end up fighting somebody in this doorway and I lose the fight, I can actually just sprint and slide backwards to use this piece of cover because I've memorized that this is where this cover is, and I've kept it kind of vaguely within my spatial awareness that this is something that I can utilize. And this is something I think a lot of players are going to struggle with early on, is the fact that you can in fact slide backwards, you can in fact slide sideways, and if you memorize where a piece of cover is in the center of the mass, you can pretty much utilize this thing in ways that are terrifying. So it's going to take some unlearning and relearning, but just being able to be 3D surrounding aware of what's in your cover space is going to be huge for your gameplay in terms of how you can break away from fights and re-engage fights. You know, it's no longer a case of snaking a single piece of cover. It's no longer a case of hiding behind a single box. It is now literally a case of, well, actually, I'm just going to slide backwards away from this. Why? Because I can. And that's a whole new system that's worth getting used to. Overarchingly though, I think Omni movement is far less about movement and far more about how you use the movement in conjunction with cover. There are very few things with Omni movement that you can do out in the open that's going to massively change how you fight an opponent. Yes, sliding sideways is going to be really hard for them to track in some scenarios, and sliding into prone, like I've shown you, is going to be a new drop shot style mechanic that I feel is going to be super powerful. However, that still doesn't change the fact that the best gameplay in terms of movement is in relation to how you use cover, how you dive behind cover to extend your time to kill in life, how you use cover to re-peek angles. And that's the biggest asset that Omni movement is giving to you going into this game. It's allowing you to use cover in entirely new ways to break away from fights, break away from situations, and decide this one isn't for me, I'm going to dive off the side of a cliff, and then I'm going to hide somewhere else. These are the options that are now available to you that have not been available before, and it's just an entirely new learning process of unlearning the fact that forwards is the only way forward. Now, left, right, up, down, backflip, and kickflip are options available to you, and as long as you're spatially aware of your surroundings, you are allowed to like full Tokyo drift around pretty much anything, and that's something that everybody needs to know. Hopefully you find this video useful, folks. If you have any questions down below, drop them in. Of course, this is going to be useful not only for the beta, not only for multiplayer, but also for the impending Warzone integration too. And if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop them down below, and I'll do my best to engage with them. Consider subscribing as well if you want lots of in-depth guides on how we're going to be doing all this stuff in Warzone, and I'll see you again in the next one.